Hi, Tom Chris. I hope you can hear me.
Hi, Dean.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I was actually going to call your straight line.
No need, no need. I am here,
I
excited.
see
How are
you.
you doing? How are you holding up?
God is good. So far, so good.
Awesome, awesome. I love it. I love it.
Ah, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Dean Keshoke, CEO and co-founder of a studio called Kunta Content, and we make great African games, as you can probably see on my t-shirt.
I never knew you made games.
Yeah, it's we are very few. There are very few of us.
That is exciting. And our topic is building a game studio in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, first of all, why games?
That's a great question. So when I was young, like most people, I used to play games. And the GTA, the Scarface, the FIFA, and it was always exciting. It was always fun, right?
Yeah.
And you'd play a game. You're in New York. You're chasing bad guys, or you're the bad guy, and then you step outside your house. You're in Africa. And it does not match. It does not tally with your reality.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so there's always that desire. I think since we were all children, I've met so many people who think it's really cool we run a game studio. It's really cool we make African games because even they, when they play games, they feel a disconnect that most of the games are unfamiliar. They have different problems, different stories, things that the average African cannot relate.
Yeah.
And we wanted to tell African stories in a new way, a new format. There are a lot of movies, there's a lot of music.
Yeah.
But games is such an exciting way for people to connect with what it means to be a Kenyan, what it means to be a Nigerian, a Ghanaian, a Ugandan, a South African in a really
Mm.
deep sense. And that's why we make games.
That's impressive. The game industry is so huge, eh?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
market
it's
opportunity.
quite big. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So now you are going to be creating animated movies or cartoonized ebooks and things.
Um, so I hope you can still hear me.
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. So our number one focus is video games and specifically PC console games. So games you'd play on a computer or a console like PlayStation, Xbox, etc.
Right.
We do have team members who have some animation experience. We have team members with art experience, comic book experience, etc.
Right.
And that has been very helpful. In terms of story, we primarily focus on African culture, African history. Because like most people have shared so many times, there's so much history culture that hasn't really translated to the modern world. And
Mm-hmm.
essentially on a daily basis, we're losing it, right? The more our seniors forget, the more our seniors unfortunately pass away, the more those stories get lost to time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the opportunities, I think, in preserving African culture is being able to keep those stories, right? Being able to
Yeah.
record them, being able to write them, being able to tell them.
Yeah.
But then oftentimes when people record them, it tends to be in a very documentary style, scholarly style, where you're writing it down word by word, etc. Um, and what often happens is that very few young people end up engaging with that story, right? And engaging with that content because it's a bit too structured. It's not that interesting. It's not on TikTok, right? It's not in a format that they enjoy. So that's
Right.
one of the journeys we are on, to try to capture those stories in a new, fun, interesting way, so that our children and our children's children and their children can
Can enjoy it.
exactly, and remember who they are, remember where they're from, and hopefully that gives them an appreciation of what they need to do in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool, right?
It's a lot of fun. It's very
Yeah.
difficult, but it
Yeah.
is also a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does it take to build a game studio in Africa, being one of the pioneers, like you said?
Uh, it's difficult. It's eating nails and eating nails for breakfast and cement for supper. It's it's definitely not an easy challenge. So just to talk a
Yeah.
bit about my personal background,
Right.
and please feel free to interrupt me if you feel I've gone too far.
No
Um,
problem.
yeah, so I started off writing stories, so making movies, making TV shows. This is about 12 years ago now. And one of the
Hmm.
ideas I had back then was a Maasai action adventure game, right? Um, and it was just very simple. I think it was a few hundred words. A story about this cool warrior who goes on these adventures in especially Kenya and Tanzania. And back then, back in 2012, if it's hard to make games right now, back then it was impossible, right? So he shelved the idea and it sort of grew dust, waiting for the right time. Um, and I went deeper into making movies, making TV shows, produced music videos, essentially understanding how stories are told, and much more importantly, how you get Africans interested, right? How you
Yeah.
get people all over the world interested. And then COVID happened. So I was doing a lot of physical events at around that time. So I was slowly hooked back into tech, did a bit of work for a gaming studio, learning how to do marketing, met a lot of game developers in the industry, and I shared that idea with a few of them, and they thought it was super cool. And we started the journey of figuring out what it means to be an African game studio.
Impressive.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
yeah. So let me take it a little bit back. Um, was it animated game that you always wanted to do when you were in school?
I think when I was in school, I just wanted to make a game, almost any game.
Right.
But the more we played games, the more we worked as African artists, game developers, etc., the
Yeah.
more the more we felt there was a gap in quality,
Mm.
right? So there are a lot
Yeah.
of African mobile games, right? And
Right.
And when you play them, mostly because of the limitations of mobile, right? You know, mobile, it's a small screen, the game can't be too big so that people don't struggle to download. Hence, you have to make a game as quality as you can, but as low in terms of performance as possible. So you find a lot of mobile games don't have very high levels of graphics, very complicated stories. They have to be
Hmm.
simple games. And we thought there was a big missed opportunity in telling interesting, exciting stories through games
Yeah.
in Africa,
Right.
right? Because for the rest of the world, mobile data shortage is not a problem, right? Storage
Hmm.
space is not a problem. But in Africa, that's a real challenge, right?
Yeah.
Um, and across Africa, a lot of people play console games. They play a lot of FIFA. They play a lot of Call of Duty, but it's unstructured, right? So no one knows how many players there are in Africa. But
Mm.
the sentiment a lot of people share is that there are many, right? So by deciding to make a high quality PC console game, we've been able to get a lot of people excited because there's so few of us. There are even fewer of us making PC console games, right?
Mm.
Um, and what that has done for our studio and even for the story is that I think many more people are interested in engaging with that because they've seen African mobile games. Now they're curious about video games. They're curious about sitting down and experiencing a story in a big screen with a lot of movement and a lot of interesting characters.
That's really impressive.
Long story short, that's our journey in making games.
Yeah, that's really impressive. The the Netflix partnership with Kogali, the movie Iwaju.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Do you think something like that is in your timeline, maybe in the near future?
Um, Currently under NDA, but I can say that we have a few really, really cool projects in the pipeline.
Okay.
Um, we've seen a lot of interest from the West, interest
Mm,
from Europe, interest from North America
mm,
in, I think I'd say stories from around the world.
right,
Um, and I think this happens not just in games, but across all media.
right.
Um, So, for example, in music, we've seen Amapiano go big and go global. We've seen
Right.
Afrobeats go big. We've seen Davido, we've seen Burna Boy, we've seen Wizkid.
Yeah.
We've seen Bollywood music also go global. We've seen K-pop. You
Yeah.
have African teenagers singing and dancing to K-pop from South Korea, a country that they know very little about, right? But they
Mhm.
connect with the story.
Right.
We've seen the same thing in movies. We've seen Black Panther. We've seen La Casa de Papel, Money Heist. We've seen Squid Game, and we've seen Narcos, and there are all these stories that are not traditionally from Hollywood or from Europe, right?
Right.
That people from all over the world connect with, even without understanding the language. And and we've also seen a lot of the same in games, and Africa still hasn't shared its story, especially at a gameplay level, right? We have movies from Africa that have gone global. We have shows, TV shows from Africa. We have music from Africa, but that hasn't happened with games yet. And
Yeah.
we are fortunate to be one of the studios changing that and making that history, so to say, right?
Right.
Um, and as a result, a lot of global publishers of games, a lot of developers are interested in coming into Africa. We've had many conversations. We have a few partnerships with some of them. We've received support, we've received funding, we've received technical support, and that has allowed us to continue to run the studio and build the studio.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay,
Thank you. Thank
so
you.
let's go back again.
Mhm.
Um, I remember you as a venture builder for one of the programs. Were
Yes.
you were you already doing this at that period?
Yes. So I've been working in tech for as long as I can remember. I think about 13 years.
Mm,
Um, I've co-founded a few startups, some of them VC backed. So when you and I met a few months back, the studio was already 3 years old. We're almost 4 years now. We should be turning 4 in December.
okay.
So yes, this is something that's been going on for a long time.
Right.
Um, as you can imagine, majority of that time was without funding. So it was bootstrapping, working on it late nights, early mornings, and trying to build the dream, right?
Mm, right.
Um, yeah, and but then now what all that other work did, all that bootstrapping, working for other people, doing other projects, what that did, doing venture building and working in venture studios, what that did is that I think it's gave us a really good foundation of understanding how to do difficult technical work in Africa. So, for example, like we have one of the highest levels of retention in gaming almost anywhere in the world. Our team has
Mm,
been together for those 4 years. Basically, no one has left, which is amazing for me as a leader. Also, a lot of pressure because they know all our stories.
yeah. Yeah.
There's no new surprise coming. This is who we
Right.
are. Yeah, and so I consider it to be a bit of a symbiosis. The venture building and working in tech and building software and game development, they feed into each other so well because they're both really
Mm,
difficult, so technical.
mhm, mhm.
And I've been fortunate to learn so much about hiring, about research, about building a story from both sides.
So who writes your story?
Unfortunately, it is me. It is I.
Beside you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
So yeah, that's my responsibility in the team.
where did you get that, skill of writing? Was it from the 13-year-old boy? tinkering with some entrepreneurial venture?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So it did start when I was young. I was very good at compositions. I used to write the craziest stories, kidnappers, and oh, the smugglers, and oh,
Right.
the thief, and so on and so forth. Um, yeah, and I started work when I finished high school. I got into university. I was studying a film course, and that taught me a lot about how to structure writing. And then also working as a producer, being able to bring a team that could effectively tell a certain story, right? So bringing together directors, bringing together cinematographers, actors, and etc. to tell this story. So that was really useful for me when I eventually got into games because there was so much background and history and failures and successes of figuring out how to tell stories and how to build stories. And then the story and games are really different. They're really interesting because what you start with is rarely what is released as a game. And oftentimes a game evolves, especially in the first few months, sometimes 3, 4, 5 complete times as you're building the game, right? Versus in movies, for example, where you sit down, you write a story end to end, and you work very hard not to change it. That is, it is stuck, right?
Right.
But in games, you might write something and then you build it and play it, and you're like, this is very boring.
Mm.
No one wants to play this. And it has also happened to us, right? We thought, for example, that herding cows would be a big part of the game, where you're just there, you're a herdsman, you're herding cows, you're taking them to a grazing area and protecting them from lions. We thought that
Mm.
would be a big percentage of the game. But the more we played it, the more we were like, okay, it's still fun, it's still interesting, but not the whole
Mm.
game. It gets boring. It's just cows, you know. Yeah.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so who was the biggest influence on you entrepreneurship wise in your family?
Oof. Oof. Oh, that's a good starting point. So my mom was a business owner. Is a business owner actually up to today. I
Wow.
did learn a lot from her. Also, she is very um useful when figuring out when to work for yourself and when to work for other people.
Mm.
And I think it's something that entrepreneurs struggle to figure out. Even I have struggled to figure out in the past, where you have a great vision, you think this thing is going to make money, it's going to change the world, etc. But your landlord is calling. And and the landlord does not care about your dreams and
Mm.
visions and etc. So
Right.
she was very useful with that. My most of my family are entrepreneurs, my uncles, my aunts. They have different businesses in the medical field, in law, in agro, and so on. So I have been fortunate to learn a lot from them.
Mm.
And of course, the traditional Silicon Valley American entrepreneurs, the Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, have always been interesting to think about at a big scale.
Right.
Yeah.
Impressive. Okay, so mom influence, then who gave you your first seed capital?
The first business I actually ran was selling my own art. So I used to draw when I was, I think, around 9 years old. So fortunately for me, no seed capital. The next business was selling biscuits in high school. Terrible business. Do not recommend. You will have you'll have many debts. Your friends will have many debts with you. At that, I used my savings. After leaving high school, still mostly used my savings. I'd say now for the studio, we've been fortunate to get a lot of funding from many different sources. We've had Ubisoft from France give us a grant. We've had Xbox from America give us a grant. Steam, we won a prize. So we've been able to get funding in many different places. But number
Yeah.
one source of funding is almost always yourself. And then, of course, family and friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Impressive. Okay, so in terms of mobilizing the talent, how did you meet your team?
So there are very few game developers in Africa. There are a few hundred at best. Definitely not more than 1,000. I was fortunate to meet most of them while working at other studios, working in the space. Um, and I think I find it's a bit easy to meet and hire. It's easy to, give someone a contract, come, let's work together, etc. I think it's usually a bit harder to cross, let's say, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years with the same team, right? And it's such a big learning curve, I find, to be able to work with people long term. So meeting the team, I think, was the easier part. Staying together, staying happy with each other, picking each other's calls, talking, sharing our lives, visiting each other's homes. Having a real strong personal connection has been a lot of work, but super rewarding. And I think the most rewarding part about this journey.
Right.
We think we're in a long 20-year journey together, maybe even longer. So if the game fails, hopefully we are still close, we're still friends, we still work on other things. If it wins, hopefully we are still friends because sometimes money makes people disagree. Yeah, but meeting the team was, to be honest, we consider ourselves very, very lucky because it was almost perfect how we met each other, right? We meet so and
Right.
so, few months later, we're working together. This is one team member that we were in the same game developer WhatsApp group. I saw something he created. I reached out. A month later, we were working together. No money, no pay, just believing in the vision and believing in the dream, right? So I think I've been incredibly fortunate, and I think God has blessed me so much with this amazing team.
Mm.
Yeah.
So the was that skill of identifying talent still from your mom
I will say it started there.
or training?
Majority, yeah, that's a good point. It did start there because I saw, like when I was 12, 13, should have an accountant, a salesperson, etc. So I did see the interaction with employees. But then the more I grew up and the more I worked for other people and also worked for myself, I think I learned the most in those scenarios. And it's such a big hack. I'd advise almost every entrepreneur, as much as possible, run your business while working for someone else because it's such a powerful translation point because you leave work 8 to 5 during the day. Your boss told you this, your colleague told you that, your supplier told you this, etc. And in the evening, when you go to your business, hopefully you do not repeat the same mistakes. And sometimes you can use some of those lessons and advantages, right? So, okay, my boss said this, it actually worked. Let me try that in my business, right? Or so and so said this, the customer was very unhappy. Maybe I should not do that in my business. That for me was the biggest lesson in managing people. So, and I've been both fortunate and unfortunate to work for very many different leaders. At this point, I've worked for about 15 different leaders, CEOs, etc. Right? So you see everything. You see, you see the character, you see the emotion, you see the people who don't care, you see the psychopaths, you see everything, right? And what often happens is that eventually you develop an empathy for the challenges of being an entrepreneur, especially if you're also doing it. You're like, I know why my boss is doing this because
Yep.
of this pressure or this stress. But also at the same time, you try not to replicate it because you see the impact it has on your team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's impressive. Okay, so now success is coming and team is happy, but obviously there would have been times when you've had to put out some fire. Tell us about that.
Tom, you want me naked on this Zoom? This so personal. Yeah. There've been a few fires. I think one of the hardest ones was there was a period of two interesting periods. There was a period of a full year where we had not made a single shilling or a single dollar or a single cent, nothing, zero, no kobo. And especially back then, we didn't have the structure that we have right now for people to justify the time and energy. they were putting into the game. Like right now, for example, we have ESOP, the team has shares, they have revenue splits, we have proper structure. Back then, there was no structure. It was mostly stories. It was me saying, it's an amazing idea, etc. That was really, really difficult. But I think there was a level of trust and appreciation for the journey where that formed during that period. Because it was so difficult, it was either we quit or we do it. The second one was in between money. And I think in between money is even harder than when there's no money at all. So we
Yeah.
got a bit of cash. Everyone was happy for like a week. We were able to pay off a few bills personally. Not a lot of money, but it felt like a lot. Fortunately, we bought equipment for everyone on the team, so they were able to continue working on the game with better tools. And then we had a 2-year period with zero, no kobo, nothing. And that was difficult because everyone had rent to pay, everyone had bills. Um, some of the team was settling down, starting to build families. But also, the difficulty was slightly diluted by the fact that we had proved to each other that we could make money, that people wanted the game we were working on, that people wanted to support us. But at the same time, our financial reality was difficult, as it happens in Africa, right? It is difficult, it is tough. So that was a very interesting challenge. But I think it also brought us really, really together as a team. And the level and the depth of trust we have with each other, I think is really, really high.
So just out of interest, and I think you've answered this on the side, but do you think between hardship and success, which one do you think builds character the most?
Ooh, that's a fantastic question. That's a fantastic question. Um, I think hardship builds the most character. Um, although if you have too much hardship, it becomes suffering, and suffering sometimes generates desperation.
Yeah.
Um, I, I think the
Right.
best scenario might actually be like, let's say 70% failure,
Doesn't
struggle,
help
etc.
anybody.
Yeah, yeah. If you have 70% failure, 70% struggle, and then 30% success, I think that's a good balance. Because if you have too much success, you get overconfident, you get arrogant, you say, we are good, we know what you're doing. And if a failure comes, it can really wipe you
Mm,
out. Yeah.
mm. Right. Okay. So marketing, how does it happen?
Games are really interesting products. One, because it is such an advantage to be private, especially for bigger companies,
Mm,
where you find big companies might release a very short trailer 1 year before release and then be quiet. And then the 3 months before release, that's when they do most of their marketing. And that's very imbalanced when you've been building something, let's say for 5 years, 6 years, right? Marketing it for 3, 4 months is a very, very short period. Um,
right.
but then also, we are not a big company. So we decided we will make noise, we will show what we have. Hopefully, people will get excited. We start off by usually releasing trailers of their progress so far. We do a lot of social media work talking about the communities that are in the game, talking about the tribes, talking about their history, their culture, sometimes even just showing photos and videos, pictures and videos of that culture, right?
Mm,
And what that has done over time is that we've been able to build quite a large digital community of people who love the game, love what you're trying to do, and want to support it.
right.
Yeah.
Impressive. Okay. So I guess, you know, it might seem like you've had it easy, but in between all these periods, some moments when it seems like everything was collapsing. Tell us about those moments. You said two already, but I'm sure there are so many others that people might find some inspiration from, especially young entrepreneurs that don't even have money to pay, fees in school, but they're
Yeah.
also trying to build a startup while in school. So Tell us more.
Yeah. Oh, there are so many stories. I think one of the most powerful ones is such a unique period as an entrepreneur when you have cash flow problems,
Yeah.
but you're hopeful.
Mm.
Cash flow problems by itself, or just not having money, that means you're broke. And that is fine, it is straightforward, right? But then there's a cash flow problem where you have zero in your pocket, but three clients have said they will pay you and they owe you 1 million each.
Mm.
But you're broke, but money is
Mm.
coming, but you're broke.
Right. Right.
Um, and I think that can be such a uniquely dangerous position to be in because it's easy for you to double down and say, in fact, I will look for money and do even more where the client has not paid, right? And I've had many scenarios like that of, you know, getting promises, getting opportunities, and not having the ability to finance them. I think the first point of advice I'd give young entrepreneurs is when you're in those positions, number one, it's always great to get a deposit. And
Mm.
number two, little money tends to be much better than all the money, right? So
Mm.
if someone owes you 1 million and they say they'll pay you in a month, request for 100 in a few days, right? Try
Right.
to
Right.
try to slice it down, try to cut it. Um, and oftentimes you'll find that the same way you have financial pressure is usually the same way your clients have financial pressure, right? So if there's a sense of empathy, of exchange there, where you're able to say, okay, yes, I understand it's a large amount, but can you do 5%, 10%, 20%? Let's slice it down. A lot of your clients might really appreciate that. And I've had many scenarios of that, right? I've had scenarios where um, I'm at zero or like the last few hundred shillings, and I'm expecting a payment of 300, 400,000 in 2, 3 days, right? And those are the times you pray. You try to sleep early so that you don't get too stressed, and you wake up early the next day and you still go at it. Um, Another difficult position to be in is when this is a difficult one to communicate, but let me try. When your team is unable to be honest with you, right? I'm not saying when your team is dishonest, which is a different thing. There's your
Unable.
team being unable. And specifically, it means there isn't a healthy enough environment or process for them to be honest with you, especially without consequences, right? For them to be able to
Right.
come to you and tell you, by the way, this product will fail. I'm just telling you, as your guy, as your team member, this product will fail. We will waste a lot of money, we'll make these mistakes, and we will fail. And usually it happens as a result of the first time they came to you with a problem, the first time they came to you with something that was very worrying, how that was handled and how that was managed, basically completely closed the door on them ever coming back.
Right.
Um, yeah, and for anyone who's had African parents, it
Mm.
is that story of